The Andy Griffith Show ran 8 seasons and gave America a town it still misses. 10 of the 12 people who built it are gone. One was buried before most fans even knew he had died. Another spent her last years asking forgiveness for things she could no longer undo. Number 1 is Andy Griffith, the man whose name was on the door. He was 86 when he died at his home on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, on the morning of July 3, 2012. His wife Cindy was at his side. The cause was a heart attack on top of years of coronary artery disease and hypertension. Here is the part that surprised people. By 11:30 that same morning, less than 5 hours after he stopped breathing, Andy Griffith was already in the ground. The funeral was private. No viewing was held. He was buried on his private estate in a family cemetery that no fan can visit. If you watch the show, you remember the voice before the face. The drawl was unhurried. His patience was a sheriff's patience that barely carried a gun and almost never used handcuffs. He played a widower raising a son with the help of his aunt, and he made that quiet life feel like the only life worth wanting. Andy Samuel Griffith was born June 1, 1926, in Mount Airy, North Carolina, the only child of a carpenter named Carl. He earned a degree from the University of North Carolina and taught English at Goldsboro High School before he ever stood on a Broadway stage. A Tony nomination came for No Time for Sergeants. Elia Kazan cast him as the menacing folk philosopher Lonesome Rhodes in A Face in the Crowd in 1957. What almost no fan ever knew is this: Andy Griffith owned a piece of his own show from the very first episode. His manager negotiated him a majority ownership stake before the cameras rolled, and that single deal made him wealthy for the rest of his life. By 1965, CBS was reportedly willing to pay him $1 million a year to continue. His best friend Don Knotts, doing the same job at the same network, was earning roughly $35,000 a year. There were 3 marriages. The first lasted 23 years and gave him the only 2 children he would ever raise: a son and a daughter, both adopted. Andy Sam Jr. died of alcoholism in January 1996 at age 38. The grief of burying his only boy sat with Andy for the last 16 years of his life. His third wife, Cindy Knight, married him in 1983 and held his hand through every illness that followed. Andy Griffith did not earn his money from Mayberry. He made it. Don Knotts is number 2 on this list, and he got paid almost nothing for the work that won him 5 Emmy Awards in 7 years. He played Deputy Barney Fife with bug eyes, a single bullet kept in his shirt pocket because the sheriff would not let him keep it in the gun, and the trembling vibrato of a man, certain he was about to die of stress on the quietest street in America. The truth is, the trembling was not entirely an act. Don Knotts was born July 21, 1924, in Morgantown, West Virginia. His father suffered from schizophrenia and alcoholism, and held a knife to young Don's throat more than once. The man died of pneumonia when Don was 13. The boy threw himself into comedy because the alternative was unbearable. He met Andy Griffith on Broadway in 1955, and the two became best friends from that day until Don died 51 years later. When Andy got a sitcom in 1960, Don called him the morning after the pilot aired and asked if Sheriff Andy Taylor needed a deputy. The deputy he became was paid $1,250 an episode, roughly $35,000 a year. His own manager later told a biographer, "I worked out this terrible deal for him where he ended up making no money in 5 years." When Don asked Andy in 1965 about returning as a regular if he could share the ownership, Andy said no. Don left Mayberry, became a movie star at Universal, and came back to television in 1979 as Ralph Furley on Three's Company. He was married 3 times and raised his daughter Karen as a single father after his first marriage ended. Karen became an actress and now performs a one-woman show about her father. When the lung cancer arrived in 2005, Don kept it private because he wanted to keep working. He died at Cedars-Sinai on February 24, 2006, age 81. Andy Griffith reached his bedside in time. "I told him I loved him and I held his hand," Andy later said on Larry King Live. "His chest heaved several times, and I believe he heard my voice." The image you will carry away is this: Don Knotts was making jokes from his deathbed. His daughter Karen had to leave the room because she could not stop laughing, and she has said for years afterward that she wishes she had stayed and laughed out loud where her father could hear her. A man whose father held a knife to his throat became the most cherished nervous wreck on television. He spent 5 decades making strangers laugh until they cried. And on the night he died, he was still doing it. If you grew up watching Barney Fife on Andy Griffith reruns, drop your favorite Don Knotts moment in the comments below. I read every one. The third entry belongs to Ron Howard, the boy who played Opie. He is the only person under 80 in the original cast still drawing breath, having turned 72 on March 1, 2026. The performance still holds up, a quiet, unforced realness that is hard to watch without feeling something. He was 6 when he started and 14 when the show ended. Born March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, he was on a film screen at 18 months old. By age 5, he was a working actor with credits on Playhouse 90 and The Twilight Zone. His parents were both actors, and they protected him so carefully that he came out of childhood Hollywood, not just sane, but happy. He met a girl named Cheryl Alley in high school. They went on their first date in 1970 when Ron was 16, and he proposed 3 times before she said yes. They married on June 7, 1975, and the marriage is still going more than 50 years later. 4 children followed. Bryce Dallas Howard, born in 1981, is the actress most viewers know from the Jurassic World films. Twin daughters Paige and Jocelyn arrived in 1985. Their son Reed, born in 1987, became a professional golfer. A few years after Mayberry ended, Ron landed Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. Once that wrapped, he stepped behind the camera and never really came back. He has won 2 Academy Awards for A Beautiful Mind, 7 Emmys, 2 Grammys, and the National Medal of Arts. In 2025, at age 71, he picked up his first Emmy nomination as an actor for guest starring as himself on Apple TV's The Studio. This may break your heart a little. Ron Howard has now outlived the man who played his father, the woman who played his aunt, the man who played his deputy, his teacher, his barber, his cousin, the town drunk, and the county clerk. After Betty Lynn died in 2021, he wrote that she brightened every scene she was in. Of George Lindsay, who died in 2012, he said the man had been warm and lovable. In February 2025, he revealed something startling, that he and Don Knotts had been distant cousins by blood, and neither one of them had ever known. The boy who grew up on the most watched American street of the 1960s is now the man carrying the memory of every other house on it. Fourth on this list is Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee for 10 seasons, across 2 shows, and quietly resented the role for the rest of her life. She was born December 14, 1902, in a brownstone on New York's Gramercy Park. By the time she walked onto the Andy Griffith set in 1960, she had been a serious actress for 35 years, Broadway, USO tours of Europe during the war, a small role in The Day the Earth Stood Still. She felt she was being thrown away in a small-town apron. The cast and crew called it walking on eggshells. Whenever her feelings were hurt, she phoned in sick. Andy Griffith later said on Larry King Live that the 2 of them had clashed during the show's run. When she won the Emmy in 1967, she resented the role even more. The trophy made it official that the work people would remember her for was Aunt Bee. Frances Bavier never married and never had children. She lived alone in a 20-room house in Siler City, North Carolina, with up to 14 cats. Her dressmaker bought the house for her in 1972 sight unseen, because Frances had fallen in love with North Carolina during the years she filmed the show. She moved there to find Mayberry. The town she found instead wanted her to be Aunt Bee, and she gradually closed her doors against it. In 1986, Andy Griffith and Ron Howard drove to Siler City unannounced to ask her to appear in the Return to Mayberry television movie. She spoke to them through her closed front door and refused to open it. The reason she gave Andy later was that she did not want anyone to see how sick she had become. Aunt Bee was killed off-screen in the script. By November 1989, she was in Chatham Hospital with heart failure and breast cancer working on her at the same time. She told the hospital administrator she would see no visitors except Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, and Ron Howard. None of them came. 4 months before her death, Frances picked up the telephone and called Andy Griffith. He recounted the conversation later on Ralph Emery's show. "I called her up," Andy said, "and she said, 'I must be made of cast iron. I've had a heart attack. Now I have cancer, and I'm only now just starting to die. I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault.'" She died at home on December 6, 1989, at age 86. The headstone at Oakwood Cemetery in Siler City reads, Aunt B. Below that name is the line, "To live in the hearts of those left behind is not to die." The woman who hated being remembered as Aunt B chose, in the end, to be buried under that name. Number 5 belongs to Howard McNear, who played Floyd the Barber and made the chair behind him sound like music. He was 56 when he joined the show in 1961 and 62 when he finally left in 1967. 16 months after that, he was dead. By the time he showed up at the Mayberry barbershop, McNear had been working as a character actor for 30 years. Born in Los Angeles on January 27, 1905, he had created the role of Doc Charles Adams on the original CBS radio Gunsmoke, holding it from 1952 to 1961. Then came the stroke. In 1963, the left side of his body went paralyzed. He could not walk. Standing was barely possible. He was off the show for a year and a half. Andy Griffith refused to let him be replaced. The crew rebuilt the barbershop scenes around him. A chair just outside the shop, a bench he could lean against, a counter for him to rest his arm on. His paralyzed left hand always held a newspaper or rested in his lap. The right hand did all the gesturing. Audiences at home had no idea what they were seeing. The 7th season was his last. By 1967, McNear could no longer remember his lines, and Andy later said watching Howard struggle through a final scene was the most painful experience he ever had on a set. McNear left. He died on January 3, 1969, at the San Fernando Valley Veterans Hospital in Sylmar, California, of pneumonia following the effects of the stroke, age 63. The eulogy was given by his lifelong friend Parley Bear, and the associate producer Richard Linka later said it was the only funeral he had ever attended where the laughs outnumbered the tears. A man who could not walk kept showing up to work because the lead actor refused to let him go. The next time you see Floyd outside that barbershop, look at where he is sitting and know exactly why. The 6th name is one of only 2 cast members still alive. Eleanor Donahue is 89 as of May 2026. She played Ellie Walker, the Mayberry pharmacist, for 1 season, the first season, and then she asked to be released from her 3-year contract and walked away. Eleanor Donahue had been on a film screen since the age of 5. Born April 19, 1937, in Tacoma, Washington, she had spent 6 seasons as Betty Anderson on Father Knows Best by the time Andy Griffith asked her to play his pharmacist love interest. The actress was 23 when the Andy Griffith Show premiered. She did not feel ready. In a 2025 interview with Woman's World, at age 88, she finally explained why she had left after 1 season. "To be honest," she said, "I felt like a bird out of a nest. I didn't feel like I had all my feathers yet, and I didn't feel capable. It was the strangest feeling." She married 3 times. Her first marriage gave her a son named Brian. The second was to a television producer named Harry Ackerman, 25 years her senior, who adopted Brian and gave her 3 more sons. They had 29 years together until his death in 1991. She married a contractor named Lou Genevrino in 1992, and that marriage continues. Her work after Mayberry was steady. Felix Unger's girlfriend on The Odd Couple, Rebecca Quinn on Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, Bridget the boutique manager in Pretty Woman in 1990, and the mother of Chris Elliott's grown-up paperboy character on Get a Life. The woman who walked away from Mayberry first because she was not yet ready is now one of only 2 human beings on Earth who can describe what it felt like to stand on that set the day the cameras rolled. If you have made it this far, hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the next one of these. The names you grew up with are leaving fast, and these stories deserve to be told properly. 7 is the man who said, "Golly," and meant every syllable. Jim Neighbors played Gomer Pyle on The Andy Griffith Show for 2 seasons before CBS spun him off into his own series in 1964. He was 32 when he showed up at the Mayberry filling station. By the time he died at his home in Honolulu on November 30th, 2017, he was 87. Andy Griffith found him singing one night at a small club in Santa Monica. Neighbors was a film editor at NBC with a baritone voice that could fill an opera house. Andy walked up after the set and told him, "You know something, boy? You're good. I'm going to bring my manager around to see you." Within 2 years, Neighbors was a star. The voice nobody saw coming was the voice that paid the bills for the rest of his life. He recorded more than 24 albums and sold out theaters across the country. From 1972 onward, he sang "Back Home Again" in Indiana, at the Indianapolis 500 every Memorial Day weekend, more than 30 times across roughly 4 decades, and the city eventually adopted him as their own. In 1975, on his birthday, a man named Stan Cadwallader walked up to him at a Honolulu shopping center and asked if he was Jim Neighbors. They had dinner that night. The two of them stayed together for the next 38 years and ran a macadamia nut farm in Maui. They married in Seattle on January 15, 2013. Stan was at his side the night he died. Neighbors had years of declining immune function. A 1994 liver transplant for hepatitis B had saved his life and given him 23 more years. But his body never fully recovered the strength to fight infection. He had open-heart surgery in 2012. By Thanksgiving 2017, he was in and out of the hospital with shingles. He came home for the holiday, went back for tests, and finally asked his doctors if he could go home for good. They let him. The man who said "Golly" sang for presidents, packed concert halls in cities that had never heard of Mayberry, and spent 4 decades as the unofficial voice of the Indianapolis 500. We close with Betty Lynn, who played Thelma Lou and outlived almost everyone. She was 95 when she died on October 16, 2021, in Mount Airy, North Carolina, after a brief illness. By then, she had lived in Mount Airy for 14 years. Kansas City came first. Elizabeth Ann Teresa Lynn was born there on August 29, 1926, raised by her mother and her grandparents. By age 5, she was studying dance. At 18, she was performing for USO camp shows in the United States, and within a few months she was overseas in the China-Burma-India Theater, entertaining troops and visiting wounded soldiers in 1945. The Andy Griffith Museum has stated she is believed to be the only American woman to have traveled the dangerous Burma Road during the war. Betty Lynn played Barney Fife's sweetheart Thelma Lou for parts of 6 seasons starting in 1961. The role was meant to be a sometime girlfriend, the woman who would never quite get the proposal. She and Don Knotts had a sweetness on screen that the writers eventually had to deal with. In the 1986 reunion movie Return to Mayberry, Thelma Lou and Barney finally got married, 20 years after they had last appeared together. In real life, Betty Lynn never married anyone and had no children. She was a devout, lifelong Roman Catholic. After a series of break-ins at her Los Angeles home in 2007, at age 81, she packed her things and moved to Mount Airy, the actual town that Mayberry had been based on. She spent her final 14 years there, signing autographs at the Andy Griffith Museum, where the line was always the longest at Mayberry days. When Don Knotts died in 2006, Betty Lynn described him to a reporter as a very quiet man, very sweet. Nothing like Barney Fife. After Ron Howard learned she had died, he wrote that she brightened every scene she was in and called her, at 95 years young. Her private burial was held in Culver City, California. She played the woman Barney could not bring himself to marry. In her own life, Betty Lynn never married a single person, and she lived to 95 in the actual town that the fiction had pretended to be. Mayberry was a town that did not exist. The two people who can still tell you what it felt like to stand there are 72 and 89 years old.